Hi guys, my name is Vivek and this is the third video tutorial in ETL testing. I have a quick request. If you have not subscribed to my channel already, please go ahead and do it now so that you get a notification as soon as I upload a new video tutorial. And though this particular tutorial is independent of the first two tutorials, I will still request you guys to complete the first two tutorials first so that you can appreciate this tutorial in a better manner. In today's tutorial, we are going to learn how the ETL jobs are scheduled and run, and we are going to take Informatica PowerCenter as our reference. So let's go ahead and discuss the contents of today's tutorial. We are going to see what are the standard scheduling tools that are used in majority of the projects and organization. Autosys actually is an industry standard for batch processes. Majority of the organizations that I have worked with, they are using Autosys. I've seen few organizations that are using Control M to schedule their jobs. Some organization use cron jobs as well, and rarely in couple of projects I've seen that people were using Informatica scheduler in order to schedule their jobs. We are going to discuss about all these schedulers in detail today. Then we are going to see, in order to schedule our Informatica workflow from these schedulers, if we are on Windows environment, we requires a batch script, or if we are on Unix environment, we require a shell script to execute these Informatica workflow. And Informatica provides you a utility or command called PMCMD, which is used in order to trigger our Informatica sessions and workflows from a remote machine. And this PMCMD command or utility can be run both on Windows and Unix system. We will see the syntax using which we can go ahead and use PMCMD in order to run our workflows from a remote machine. We will see all that in a moment. And then finally we will see the progress of our job in our Informatica monitor. We will track the status, whether it was successful or if it failed, what kind of data was loaded as a part of that particular jobs, and finally we will go ahead and verify our extracts or the data that has been loaded as a part of the job. So that's the flow, that's how it goes. For example, if you are using Autosys to schedule your jobs and you are using a Unix shell script to trigger your Informatica workflow, you will go ahead and log into your Autosys. You will go ahead and start the job. That Autosys command job will in turn use this shell script and PMCMD command to trigger the Informatica workflow. You can capture the progress of the workflow in Informatica monitor. Once the job has completed, the status will be passed back to your Autosys as well. You can see whether the job was successful or not. If the job was successful, you can go ahead and verify the counts that were loaded as a part of that particular run from your Informatica monitors. And finally, you can go to your database or your file system to see if the extracts were generated successfully and correctly, or if that particular job was loading a table, whether that happened correctly or not. So let's go ahead and discuss about scheduling our Informatica job or ETL job in a little further detail. Schedulers actually are used to run the job when specific events occur. So these are the four prime examples when you will go ahead and schedule a particular job. You can go ahead and schedule a particular job to run at a particular time. For example, I know that every night I receive certain files from my source system at 10 p.m. So just to be on the safe side, I can go ahead and schedule my job to run at 11 p.m. just to have that 1 hour margin to make sure that I don't miss those files. This is very common, guys. During the day, the data is processed in our OLTP systems, and eventually that data is being passed to my ODS data warehouse and data mart in nightly process. So we have a lot of batch jobs that are scheduled during the night time. Once the development for these jobs are done, we actually set an expectation with our source team that they will go ahead and send the files till this particular time, and we schedule our job to run accordingly. The other scenario is that our source system is going to send us a trigger file or a bunch of files to indicate that their source load process has completed and we can go ahead and start our process. So we can set this particular requirement in our scheduling tool that only run this particular job when this file has arrived, or this is predominantly done in our file watcher. So what exactly we will go ahead and do, we will run our job at a particular time and we will configure our Windows batch script or Unix shell script in a manner that it will not trigger the Informatica workflow until it sees that particular file. And guys, this is a very common requirement. File watchers are very common in every project. So what we will do is we will set a time that, alright, using Autosys we will go ahead and trigger the job at 11 PM, but the actual Informatica workflow will only run when the set of trigger files or a single trigger file has arrived. Another possibility is sometimes we will set a flag in the table to indicate that the source load has completed. We will start our Autosys job at a particular time and we will keep querying that particular table to see if the flag has been set. As soon as the flag has been set, we are going to trigger our Informatica workflow. Or there is another possibility. We can actually go ahead and schedule a job on the completion of a process or a job. So let's go ahead and discuss these things in a little further detail using Autosys. We have two prime components when we talk about Autosys Jil Files. The first is the box job and the second is the command job. A box job can have one or multiple commands in a box. What we usually do is we usually tie related operations together in a box, and we have specific time and conditions when the box should be triggered. So for example, I receive my employee data, my agent data, my hierarchy data from my source system around 11 PM, and I have configured 10 ETL processes to load that particular data in my warehouse, in my mart or in my ODS. Instead of keeping them apart, what I can do is I can create 10 command jobs and I can put all those command jobs in a box, so that in future if I want to go ahead and see the status of these jobs or the dependencies between them, it will be easy for me to track. So what you usually do using box job, you actually tie together the related operations. The command job has slightly different kind of information. It actually has the details of the Unix shell script or the batch script that will be executed as a part of the command. It has the detail of the file name and the location where the file is being placed. Another detail that it has is the machine name on which the job will run. And guys, this is very important. A lot of people get confused that my Informatica server is set up on one machine while my Autosys server is set up on second machine and my application is set up on third machine. How they are correlated and how the function is happening, we will see that in a moment using a diagram. The other thing that the command job contains is that if there are any other dependencies, for example, I cannot go ahead and load employee hierarchy till my employee table has been loaded. So the command job for employee hierarchy will have dependency on the employee table load, and I cannot load team information till I have loaded employee and employee hierarchy. So on employee hierarchy, I may have a dependent job which is loading the team level of data. So that kind of information is stored in my box and command job. Command job actually has the detail of the batch script or the Unix shell script that is to be run, where it is present, what's the name of that file, on which particular machine that command will be run, and that kind of stuff. While my box job actually contain the information when these jobs are to be run, what are their dependencies among each other, and it actually acts as a capsule for all these jobs to tie them together, so that whenever we need to go ahead and track their status or see their dependencies, it will be easier to track. So guys, this diagram is very important to understand. As I mentioned that my batch jobs are usually scheduled on Autosys server. Now this Autosys server is configured on a Unix machine and the name of the machine is ABC. So whatever box jobs or command jobs I'm going to create, they are going to reside on this particular server, Autosys server ABC. Now the application server that I have where I'm coding my Unix shell scripts, that is on PQR. So there is already a network connectivity established between my machine name ABC and my machine name PQR. Now what exactly happens when I mention the Autosys command job, I will mention the machine name PQR in the Autosys command job. So as soon as I will go ahead and execute that particular job, my Autosys server will understand that it needs to execute that particular command on this server PQR. The location that I have specified in my Autosys command job will also belong to this particular server. So it will go ahead and execute that particular command on this particular server. Now there is another important thing that you need to understand. Majority of the organizations have dedicated Informatica server for the entire organization. So what will happen? They will install an Informatica server on a different Unix machine. So my Informatica server is installed on a different machine XYZ. Let's understand this again in detail. So I have 3 laptops. One laptop with the machine name ABC. I have installed Autosys server on this particular laptop. Then I have another laptop PQR. Here I am storing all my shell scripts that I am going to use in my project. And then I have another laptop XYZ where I have configured Informatica servers. So I have around 10 to 15 teams that are coding in Informatica on different applications. All those details will be stored in this particular Informatica server. So this particular server is shared between different teams, while this particular machine PQR is only for my particular application. And this particular Autosys server laptop ABC, this is again shared by multiple teams. So the only thing that's specific to me is this machine PQR. Now what's going to happen when Autosys job is being executed? It knows that it has to find that particular shell script in this particular machine name PQR, and it knows the location and the file name as well. Now there is a prerequisite. My PQR server should have Informatica client installed on it. If the client is not installed, the workflow cannot run, the session cannot run. The client actually allows me to access the server, and if I have the client installed, I still have to go ahead and specify certain details, and I will explain that in a moment. That even though I have not installed Informatica server on my PQR machine, which is my application server, I can still go ahead and run my Informatica jobs using PMCMD command. So this is how you actually go ahead and use Autosys in order to trigger your Informatica jobs. If you want to actually schedule these jobs using Informatica directly, I will show in a moment using Informatica how you can go ahead and do that. I will go ahead and click on workflows and I will click on schedules. Using this, I can go ahead and create new schedules. So I'm creating a schedule test workflow, and I will click on schedule. I've set here run on integration service initialization. So as soon as my integration service is initialized, it can go ahead and run it, but that is not what I want. I want to run it every single day at a particular time. So I will go ahead and run it at, say, at 10 p.m. So I've set that particular value, and I want to run it forever till I go ahead and change the schedule. So I have created this schedule, and now I will go ahead and assign this particular schedule to my workflow. So if I go ahead and click on workflow and click on edit, in my scheduler tab, I can go ahead and specify this particular schedule to this workflow. I will click on reusable, and I will go ahead and select my test workflow schedule here. So if you see, as soon as my integration service is initialized, it will run every day forever at 10 p.m. and the start date is today's date, which is 19th Feb. So if I go ahead and apply, it's going to capture this particular schedule, and it will trigger this particular schedule on a daily basis using this particular schedule. Though I have not seen too many projects where I'm using Informatica scheduler, usually for big organization they use a particular scheduling tool like Autosys, because it's relatively easier to capture the success and failure status and that kind of thing. And that particular scheduler can be used for multiple other purposes as well. You can go ahead and trigger Oracle scripts and that kind of stuff. So it's usually very common that people go ahead and use a standard scheduler across the organization, and Autosys is the most common scheduler that I have seen. Now there is two ways I can go ahead and run this workflow. I've already logged into my workflow manager, so Informatica knows that I'm an authorized user and it will verify if I have the access to run this particular workflow. If you see in workflows, I have specified the integration services where I want to go ahead and run this particular workflow. Informatica knows that this particular workflow resides in the repository rep_test and the workflow is present underscore this demo. So Informatica will provide me the option to run this particular workflow. I can go ahead and right click and start this workflow. It will go ahead and run it because it already has my username as and password information. It knows that this particular workflow is present in this particular repository rep_test in demo folder. It knows that the integration service that I have specified for this particular workflow is service_demo. Now you are not going to run these workflow manually in your production environment. So Informatica has created a utility called PMCMD, using which you can remotely trigger your workflows from remote machines. So if I'm on Windows, I can go ahead and create a batch script using which I can use PMCMD to trigger this particular workflow. Or if I'm on Unix machine, I can use the same utility PMCMD to trigger this workflow. And guys, even tester should know this particular flow because he or she should know where exactly the failure happened. Whether the failure happened on the Autosys level, that means the Autosys was not able to call the job on the Unix box, or if the shell script was executed on the Unix box, whether there was a connectivity issue between the Unix box and the Informatica server, or if the Informatica job was actually triggered, where exactly was the failure. A good tester should have that kind of knowledge and that kind of information. Let's go back quickly to our presentation and see what I'm talking about. So a tester should know where exactly the failure happened. For example, if he goes ahead and logs into its Autosys server and executes a job and the status of that job is failed, he should know where exactly the failure happens. Whether the Autosys server was able to execute this particular job on my application server, that means whether this particular connection was established correctly. If this particular connection was established correctly, he should go ahead and verify whether the Informatica job was actually called. He can do that by looking at the Informatica monitor. If the Informatica monitor signifies that the job was run, that means these two connectivities are correct. The job was run, but there was an issue with the job, that's why it failed. So you can go ahead and check the session log to actually identify what was the reason for the error, and then go back and report to the developer that, you know what, though the Autosys job is calling the Informatica job, but there is a database issue, you have not specified the connection, or whatever is the reason for the failure in the Informatica job, he can go back and report to the developer. A good tester should have that kind of knowledge and information that at least he can do the basic tracking, that where exactly is the pinpoint of failure. If the job failed on the Informatica server, it will return an error code to my application server Unix script, which will again return an error code to my Autosys server. That's how the Autosys server will say that the job has failed. Another important point to verify is that if you are seeing success status on your Autosys server while your workflow monitor has showed that the job has failed, there is a chance that the Unix shell script that you has created is not tracking the success and failure status correctly. So if that's the case, you should go back to your developer and say that, you know what, although your Informatica job has failed, the Autosys job is saying that the job was completed successfully. So your Unix shell script is not tracking the success and failure of Informatica job correctly. You need to modify your Unix script. So what I will do is, if I'm a tester, I will go ahead and deliberately try to abort or stop my Informatica job to make sure that my Unix script is correctly capturing the status and the same is reflected correctly on my Autosys server as well. Let's talk about PMCMD once more. So PMCMD is a utility provided by Informatica to remotely trigger Informatica workflow and session. So if my application server has Informatica client installed on my machine, even though the server is not installed on that particular machine, I can still go ahead and run my Informatica workflows using this particular utility. This is the syntax in order to use that particular utility. I will go ahead and specify start workflow, and I need to specify the integration service. So if you remember, even when I'm directly running my workflow, I still have to specify my integration service here. So if I'm running my workflow remotely from a different machine, I will have to explicitly specify this particular value, and I can keep it as a variable value as well. I can go ahead and specify this particular variable value as a part of my Windows batch script or a shell script. Guys, this particular syntax is for a Windows batch script. For a Unix shell scripts, it's slightly different. Instead of specifying these ampersand values in Unix, you specify dollars values because that's how you represent variables in Unix. So you have to specify that you want to start the workflow. You have to specify the integration service using which you are going to run your workflow. Then you have to specify the domain name in which the workflow is going to run. You have to specify the username and password using which you are going to log into your Informatica server. So if you see, when we were running the Informatica server directly, we had already specified the username and password while logging in. So those particular information are not required in that particular case. Even the domain name is not required because now you have logged into a particular repository, so Informatica knows in which domain you want to run, and you are running the workflow in a particular folder, so you don't have to specify that information as well when you are running directly. But when you are running using PMCMD, you have to specify the integration service, you have to specify the domain name, you have to specify the user credentials using which you are going to log in, you have to specify the folder where the workflow is present, and then you have to specify the workflow name as well. Guys, this wait option is very important. Sometimes you don't specify it. In that case, what will happen, as soon as this PMCMD command will execute as a part of your Windows batch script, if I have not specified wait, it will go ahead and execute the next command. So the status will not be captured correctly, whether it successfully executed or whether it failed. It will not be captured. So you need to make sure that you specify wait option when running a workflow. What exactly will happen once this process will be completed? That means once my Informatica workflow will be completed, I can go ahead and capture the status of that particular run, whether it's completed successfully or it failed. If it failed, I can go ahead and return that particular error code to my Autosys job saying that, you know what, my Informatica workflow actually failed. Then you can go ahead and report back to your developer that your Informatica job has failed. That's why your Autosys job has failed. You need to go ahead and take a look. You can go ahead and raise that defect. And guys, I want to say this again. I have not seen a single project where actually people run Informatica's workflows manually in production using right clicking or using Informatica schedulers. Majority of the project actually use Autosys or Control M to schedule their jobs, and then they have Windows batch scripts or Unix shell scripts that actually use this PMCMD utility to go ahead and schedule the workflow. Though you may not want to go too much in the detail, this particular video is more than sufficient for a tester. You should know the event that is going to trigger your Autosys job. Then you should know the batch or shell script that is going to execute your Informatica workflow. Then you should know the job that is being executed on your Informatica workflow. You should go ahead and log into your Informatica workflow monitor to see whether the job executed successfully or not. What are the number of rows that were being loaded as a part of that particular run, if that run was successful or not. And then you can go ahead and finally verify whether the number of files that were supposed to be created were created or not, or if that particular job was loading certain amount of data, whether that was loaded correctly or not on your database. So that is the flow that you need to understand when we are talking about ETL load. If your Autosys says that the job was completed successfully, go ahead and log into your workflow monitor and see the job run. You go ahead and see that what are the run statistics. If there are any failures, you go ahead and see the session log for issues so that you can go ahead and report that to your developer. Once you log into your session logs, and if there is a failure, you can just press E from your keyboard and it will take you to the line where the failure has occurred. So you can note that particular failure reason, or you can take a snapshot using Snagit or snipping tool that, you know what, this is the reason why your job has failed. You want to go ahead and rectify that. It actually helps the developers as well to pinpoint or to easily modify that. All right, this is the pain point or this is the failure point. He can go ahead and quickly remediate that. So a good tester actually logs that kind of details in his error report. If the job was successful, you can go ahead and verify your extracts and data. You can see that whether the amount of data that was supposed to be loaded, or the number of extracts, or the kind of data that was supposed to be a part of the extract is being done or is being loaded correctly or not. So guys, let's just do a quick recap what we talked about in today's tutorial. I mentioned that predominantly in majority of the industries we use Autosys to schedule our job. There are few industries that use Control M and other scheduler as well, like some use cron jobs or some use Informatica schedulers, but they are relatively low. I'm guessing that if you are working on a real project, you are possibly using an Autosys or Control M. Then we talked about that Autosys can be a shared server between multiple teams in an organization. So in order to execute your job on your application server, you need to specify the machine name of your application server, and it's not compulsory that the Informatica server will be installed on your application server. Again, there is a possibility that the Informatica server is shared by multiple teams in an organization. So by default, the organizations actually install the Informatica client on your application server as well, and the developers actually use PMCMD utility with the correct syntax and correct values to actually trigger the Informatica workflow remotely on the Informatica server. Once the job has run successfully, you can go ahead and validate the results first in your workflow monitor. Let's just quickly go ahead and see that. So here, if you see, I had run this particular workflow, it has failed. If I go ahead and right click on this particular session and click on get session log, as soon as I click E, it's going to take me to the error tab. So if you see here, it says that the error writer execution has failed, and that's because I'm trying to populate a null value in a not null column. So what I can do is I can take a snapshot of this particular error and I can place it in my error report or my QC that, you know what, this is the reason why your Informatica workflow is failing. And if I see my Autosys, it should actually reflect that the job has failed, and it should not say that the job has succeeded. So I want to validate that kind of results in my Autosys as well. If the job had completed successfully, I would go back to my database, or I would go back to my NAS location where the extracts are supposed to be generated. I will go ahead and validate that kind of data. Now what exactly I should see when I'm validating that kind of data, we will see that in a later tutorial. And in my next tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a brief overview of Informatica Designer, Informatica Workflow Manager, Informatica Monitor, and Informatica Repository Manager, and as a tester, which components you should actually know and that kind of stuff. Guys, hopefully today's tutorial was informative. If you have any questions, any doubts regarding today's tutorial, just drop in a comment and I'll try to answer them as soon as possible. Thanks a lot guys for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.